All right, hi and welcome. My name is Michael Liendo, online known as Model Evolution, and today we're going to go ahead and check out this cool little Giphy little search application we have going on. You can kind of imagine what's going to be happening here is that we're going to type in whatever we want, say like monkey, and when we hit search, if I could do monkey, hit search, we're going to want to go ahead and fetch a GIF from Giphy. And subsequently, we want to have that image, whatever it may be, show up right in here. And then we want to go ahead and update the URL at the bottom to reflect that. That way we can share it, and we can put that on Slack or wherever you want. Now, as far as some of the inspiration that went behind it, well, I wanted a way to quickly have a GIF show up, whatever it may be, for whatever I typed in. But when I went to Giphy, they like to load all of their GIFs, and it kind of took forever depending on if you're on a slow network or not, and I wanted to find a better way. So here it is. Now if you're following along and you want the starter files, definitely go ahead and check out my GitHub. So Model Evolution /gifloader-public, and it'll kind of give you some assignments. The way I set this up is I was teaching a class, and or rather am teaching a class, and we kind of went through this as an intro to JavaScript. So what does that mean? So we're not going to touch on any frameworks. We're not using anything like Angular or React or Vue or blah blah blah. We really want to touch on the basics. So, and when I say basics, modern basics. So const, let, we're not using var. Arrow functions are going to be in here. How do you grab stuff from the DOM, etc. And all in all, I think you'll be surprised that with this cool syntax that we have, the actual JavaScript portion is going to be about 30 lines. And that'll allow us to accomplish just about everything that we want to do. And down here, you can see that there's some assignment information if you wanted to check that out as well. Kind of give yourself small little challenges incrementally. All right, but let's get started. So what does the project look like as far as the code? Well, we have this HTML file, and I just spun this up. I'm using VS Code, so you really don't have to worry about what's going on in the head tag. In the body tag is where we're going to be doing all of our traversal, and you can see that I have a class container going on. We have a form ID, GIF form, and everything else is pretty much laid out the same way, so with GIF being the context. So GIF form, GIF search input, GIF search button, and GIF container, and that's going to have the image in the paragraph tag. Pretty straightforward. We're going to like 7-8 lines of code there, HTML, and then of course we have our JavaScript. Up here we have our styles. I'm just going to touch on that real quick. So it's built on Flexbox. Nothing too crazy going on. Just have a container element right up here, and then everything else has a max width, and then we're kind of setting the colors of the text at the bottom. So let's get started here. I want to take us through the flow, and the way I like to do that is by looking at this project that we have set up. Now usually you're going to have a drawing. At least I like to sketch my ideas out, because you obviously don't have a near finished product in front of you. But since we're fortunate enough to have that, we can walk through here. So what I want to happen, I want that when I type into this text input and hit search, a GIF shows up. So the first thing I want to do is grab that input value. I'll open up my dev tools real quick. Perfect, and that'll give us context as we go along. So the first thing I want to do is grab that input. So the way we're going to do that is simply say const, and we're going to say const, and let's go ahead and grab, I was going to do input, but if you look here, if I say input and I specifically say GIF search input, well, someone might come around and be like, hey, well, I want to be able to search for something else. So actually we want to narrow down the context, because if someone by chance names theirs GIF search input, then it's going to screw up our GIF input, and well, you get the idea. So let's target the form. and then we'll say, hey, give me the input that's specifically in this form. So if I do something like this, GIF form, and we set that equal to document.querySelector, and I do it was a class of GIF form, and just to double check here, ID of GIF form, so that wasn't going to show it for us. Make sure you have an ID. And just to make sure we're on the right track, I'm going to refresh. And you see how when I refresh, nothing's happening. But if I do GIF form, cool, we have our form. So then you might be asking, well, why are you using const? Like, I mean, I remember in my JavaScript days, we were using var. Why can't you do var GIF form? And you can. Var isn't going away, at least not as of right now. But we're not modifying this value. And so it should be a constant. I mean, just because by definition, constants mean you don't change it. But then you're like, well, I heard about this thing called let. What's going on there? Well, as a quick aside, so const is the easy one, right? That just means you're not changing it. But with let, how does let different from var and vice versa? So we have these two here. And the example I like to give is, well, I guess the short answer is because you don't want your variable names to conflict or collide with things that might already be declared. What do I mean by that? Well, if I say something like var, and you're working with like longitude and latitude, for example, so you're like var location equals the latitude is 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. You're like, cool, I have this location, but what happens if I go to my page and I refresh? So we have our file path, but then we have this 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. Well, why did that happen? Well, it happened because there's actually a global variable, which is window, which is window.location, and I think that's a lowercase location right there. So that's a global. So if I do just location, it's going to attach itself to whatever's above it, and that's going to be this whole global window. So you're like, okay, that's simple enough, but I mean, if you do let, that isn't going to happen. Let me go back, and yeah, let's explore that. So if I say let location equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and I refresh, boom, location has already been declared. Why? Well, because it's not in the global scope. Let is saying, hey, we're in the scope of this project, of this document. So you're like, oh, well, Michael, that's super simple. Like, I can just do something like if, and then have a statement in here, and then I'll set my var statement, and I'll say location equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, boom, take that. Well, that actually doesn't work. Why? Because, and then you're like, no, I heard that if you put it in braces, then that's not the case. And I'm like, no, you didn't hear the whole story. Because this scopes to the braces here that you're referring to, this fictitious person. It's only true when you have a block, when you're in block scope. Well, isn't this block scope? Not really. Remember that it's a function block, but this is an if statement, and statements are treated differently. But how does that differ from let? If I say let, save, and if I go back, then I can refresh, and I'm not being taken away, because again, let scopes to the actual braces, and not to the not polluting your global scope. So that was just a quick little aside there. So cool, we have our form, but we don't really want the form, do we? We want the actual input. So I'm going to say const and then GIF input. And we're going to say that this is in the context of the GIF form. Now, why am I using GIF form and not document.query selector? Because I don't need JavaScript to go ahead and go through my entire document. I really just need to look in the context of this. So I can say that, and if you want to look back, you can see that in the input, you have this ID of GIF search input. You're like, whoa, Michael, I don't need to do all of that. I mean, the GIF form, I know that its children returns an array. I can see that right here. But if I do index 0, well, that's going to give me the first element, right? So take that. And you're right. We have our GIF form, and the first item in this children array, or node list rather, is an input. And if we log that out, I'm going to clear this out, and then say GIF input. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have our search input. But then mischievous Michael comes around, and he's like, yeah, that's cool. But then I'm going to go ahead and do something like this. Right? And just stack that right up there. All of a sudden now you are targeting the first child element. And if we refresh though, and we try to do GIF input, see what that represents. Oh, it's this div. It's not my input. It's a div containing the input and the button. So that's why we want to go ahead and do that and not use children in case you're coming from that background. So we'll switch this back. Query selector. And remember what I said is that we're targeting this whole GIF search input. I'm going to delete this as well. Cool. So we have our GIF search inputs. And we can stick that bad boy in there. And do GIF search input. And if you want to be really selective, we can say, hey, give me the input that has this whole GIF search input. But we can just do it like that, and this works perfectly fine. So we have the input, and we have the form. And remember, we wanted the input so that we can grab the value from it. But we only want that value if we're looking back. Well, when do we care about it? I mean, if I'm typing in something here, and if I'm doing something like P-O-K-E-M-O, and before I hit N, I don't need all of these letters. When I hit N, and then I hit search, or enter, that's when I want that value that's in there. So really I want to listen to when that form gets submitted. And that leads me into event listeners. Because we have our form up here right on line 1, and we need to add an event listener to it. So if I say something like GIF form, and then .add event listener, well, that's going to give me a whole list. So you can see these here of things I can be listening to. Specifically, I'm going to listen to the submit. But you can do things typically like click. Down the list, you can see point over, pointer out, pointer up, all kinds of things. So it's worth exploring. But in this case, we just want to listen to the submit event on our form. Once we do that, we have this callback that gets fired. A callback is just when this happens, then go ahead and let me know what happens. And that's going to give us the event. So I'm going to use an arrow function. Keep in mind that this syntax right here is the exact same as if I was to do something like this. This might be something you're more used to. We have our function, and it's going to have the event, braces, right, exact same. But I'm just going to do it like this. We have our event, boom. So how do I know that this is working? Well, we can log out the event and see what kind of goodies we get from here. Alright, so once I refresh, I'm going to get the event. And if you see, well, let me try that again. I'm refreshing, but nothing's happening. Well, that's because we haven't submitted the form. And if we click search, watch what happens in the developer console. So right over here, see what happens there. I'm going to hit search. And for just an instant, I'm going to hit search again. It looks like we're getting our event. I mean, I'm really going to click it. And we're getting our event, but then it disappears. And if you look at the refresh right up here, when I click search again, it's refreshing. So we need a way to stop that. And if you've worked with forms before, you know that that's the default behavior. Is that whenever you make a search or you submit a form, it's expecting you to send some data over to the server side and have that as a post request and get something back and blah, blah, blah. But we don't want that. We're just working with this single page application. And so we need a way to stop that default behavior, rather prevent it. Well, super simple. Because if we click on, or if we select E, which is our event, and we say, hey, you event that's going on, why don't you prevent your default behavior? And we do by e.prevent default. Now if I save and refresh and click search, whoop, maybe, e.prevent, oh, I'm not logging out the event. There we go. So now if I save and refresh and I click search, I get the event. Move that over a little bit so you can see it. And yeah, you can see when the event happens, we're getting all sorts of good stuff. I mean, is this trusted? We get the path, the return value, the source. We know it's coming from our form. And we need that because if you look again and we hit search, this whole refresh, reload isn't happening. Why is that important? Because now we can go ahead and grab the input. We can say something like GIF input, and we want the value off of that. What's that value? And then don't forget we want to go ahead and see what this is. So we have a const, and remember const because we're not changing it. Const search text, and we'll set that equal to our value. So we have that, and if I type something in here, I'm just going to refresh the page and do something like hi and click search. Well, assuming it went through, we didn't have any feedback going on, but if I do something like this, search text, what do I get back? Search text is not defined. Whoop. Why aren't you defined? Because the event listener is gone. So then alright, so we prevented that default behavior. And now what do we want to do? Well, this gives us a great opportunity to go ahead and grab the input that the user submitted. So the way we do that is we say, hey, I'm going to have a constant, and I'm going to name it search text, because this is the text that the user presumably is wanting to search for. And I'm going to set that to GIF input dot value. Now what is value? You can see it right over here. Value is going to be a string. Essentially, it's just whatever the user put into the input field. And if I go ahead and test it by logging it out, just like that, and save and refresh, if I put in something like hello, look at that. We get hello right in the console, and it lets us know that we're on app.js line 7. And if I look back over there, yep, that's where I'm logging this out. So that's cool. That lets us go ahead and grab the input, but really we want to do more than that, right? If we're looking back at our example, we're saying, hey, when you put in text right in here and you click search, I really want you to go out and just fetch some data from this API, specifically from Giphy. And we can do that. That's actually pretty straightforward. So coming back here, we want to say, hey, go ahead and fetch. And where do we want to go? So fetch says, hey, give me some data. Let me know what's going on. But we haven't told it anywhere, and really we don't know yet where we're going to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Giphy API. And API stands for Application Programming Interface. A really, really fancy word of saying, hey, I'm Giphy, I made some stuff, and I want you to be able to use it. So we're on their website, and if you've never worked with an API before, some of them is kind of hit and miss, but hopefully you have a great documentation. Giphy is really, really good in their documentation. And then also as you look down here, they implement cores, which I'm not going to touch on it in this tutorial, but something to keep in mind is if you ever get an error in your screen and it says, hey, you don't have cores going on, definitely make sure that the core is enabled. In any case though, first thing you need to do is create an app. So I'm going to create one, and I'm going to say this is called Giphy Demo. And you do need a description, and I'm just going to say a short tutorial on Giphy API. Awesome, so I have one here before, and these are just my sample keys, so I'm not too worried about you guys taking these and doing something crazy with them. And for the purposes, again, for this tutorial, we're not pushing this out to a server, we're not going to make it live, and so we don't need a production key, and these little demo keys work just fine. And because they're just little demo keys, I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it right at the top. And I'm going to say const, and watch what I do here. I have it in caps, and I say API key equals, and I'm going to paste that in just like that in quotes. There. Now why is this a const and it's camel case, and this is a const and it's uppercase? Well, the reason being is because you want to be really specific in when you name your constants that, hey, this GIF form, that's a constant because I'm not changing it. This is a constant because I'm not changing it, and I don't ever want it to be changed. And the way we make that distinction by convention is just by having it in all uppercase letters. There's other things you could do to kind of instill that it's not supposed to be changed. But this at least gives you kind of the first round of like, hey, heads up, don't ever change this. Where this is just saying it doesn't change, so JavaScript, you can do a quick little optimization. So that's cool. We have an API key. What do we need that for? Well, we need the API key because Giphy is like, hey, you could use our services for free, and that's cool and dandy, but we want to be able to know who you are. So we go ahead and we tell Giphy who we are, and then they say, all right, that's awesome. Here's your key, access granted. And from here, we can explore the docs. And if I click on docs right up here, and we want to be able to search. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit, and you can see one of the very first things, or the very first bulletin, is this whole search. And it says replicates the search found on Giphy. Perfect. It doesn't get much more straightforward than that. So I'm going to click search, and it takes us all the way down here. And how it works is that you say basically https:// and then you throw on this host. So first you say the protocol, then you say the host, and we say, hey, give me this. The version 1 gives search. And that's basically our entire path to be able to search for something, minus 2 things. And how do I know that there's 2 things? Well, if we look right here, it's saying, hey, these are required, and we need a request parameter called an API string. And then we also want another one, which is Q standing for query, which is going to be a string as well. Both of those required. You give us those. You go ahead and tell us the URL, and hey, you're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick in here, right at the top. And again, I don't want this to change. I mean, the URL should never really change. So I'm going to call this our base URL. Now watch what I'll do here. Right above tab, I'm using the backticks, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and say https:// and I'm going to put in our api.giphy.com, and then I'm going to do our version 1 GIF search. And from here, remember it needs the API key. Well, we have that right here, right here. And then we also have the input text, which is right here. So with those two things, we can make our request. Now, how do we let it know that, hey, we're added on these request parameters? Well, in URL land, we do that with a question mark. And we're saying, hey, we're getting ready to search for some stuff. Just a heads up. So remember it says API _ key. You can't see it, but there's an underscore here, right there. And that's going to equal. Now watch this. You might be used to something like, hey, we do plus, and then API key. We're not going to do that here. The reason we're using these backticks is so that we can use something called a string template. And we do that by saying $, curly braces, and you can inject a variable in here. You can say API key in caps, just like how we have it. Whoop. Just like that. So if I console log this out to see what we have, and just to make sure that it's working, we're going to log out that base URL. And if I go back and refresh, we have exactly that. We have our URL, it has the API key, but it doesn't know what to search for. So we have to tell it that. We're saying, hey, get down here in our fetch request and put those backticks in there. And the reason we're going to do that, real quick, I'm going to take out that console log. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say, hey, use that base URL. Whoop. And then go ahead and add on an and q. I know it's getting really weird. And q equals, and then another variable. So we have our URL. It has our API key. And we're saying and make a query and set that equal to what? This right here, our search text. Awesome, good job. Do search text. So that gives us something interesting, and the way we can test that out is I can say, hey, console.log, whatever you give me back. So this should be our data, right? Well, if I look in here and I refresh and I say BANANAS, just like how the song goes, and I search for that, what do I get back? Well, that's not what I wanted. And why is that? Well, it's because this whole fetch thing, it fetches some data, and it might go, and it might not. But it's saying, hey, I promise I'm going to give you some kind of data. And that's the idea here, is that fetch returns a promise. It might give you your data, or you could have typed in something wrong, and an error gets thrown, and in which case it's not going to give you your data, but it's promising to give you something. And if I look in here, and if I kind of break it down, and I check out the response, well then I do get our data here. It has the URL, a status code of 200, there's some headers on here, and there's a body, which is a readable stream. Now, let's take a peek into that readable stream, and the way we do that first is to go ahead and unwrap the promise. So we say, hey, fetch that data, and if everything goes well, then go ahead and take that response and turn it into JSON. Just like that. Now what happens from here? Well, just like how we're telling it, go ahead and get that data. It's going to give us a promise back. If everything goes well, turn it into JSON. And that's going to be that readable stream that we saw. Do I have it still pulled up? Yes. Right here. This is the JSON data. It doesn't know what kind of data it's getting back, right? It could be JSON. It could be a picture, image. It could be anything. It doesn't know. So we're specifically saying JSON as opposed to something like blob. Not blog, blob for an image. So okay, we have that JSON data, presumably. And from here, and it's going to return that. Here, we're saying then take that data, and I want you to just, for now, we're just going to console log it. And we'll see what we're going to get. Are we on the right track? Let's refresh. Let's search for something like rainbows. Search. And what do we get here? Well, we get JSON back, that's for sure. You can tell by the object. And it has this whole, inside of this data, it has a property called data. It has a meta tag. It has pagination. And if I go ahead and check into here, look at that. We have 25 objects with a type of GIF. And if I crack one of those open, and I say, hey, let's look out the images, all this good stuff is going on. And if I check out if I go to original, and I say, hey, what's the original URL for just this image? And if I copy and paste that into my browser, make sure you remove those quotes, and let's see what we get. Does it have anything to do with the rainbow? By golly gee, it does. Awesome. So we have our data, kind of, right? We only have it because we're console logging it. But before we move on, I want to go ahead and touch base on this crazy little syntax that I'm doing right here. So as I mentioned, this is an arrow function. You can tell by the fat arrow right here. But it's super, super concise. Well, I could easily just go ahead and break this out into something more familiar, which you might be like this. I say, hey, we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to put another curly brace right here. Okay, now it looks kind of familiar. Now you can kind of see what's going on. Like, you might be used to something like that, and that's perfectly acceptable. But since we only have one parameter, I can remove those. If you have more, keep them in and add your comma. And since we only have one thing going on here, essentially, that return can be implied. So if we have an implicit return, then we don't need the braces. And by definition, implicit means it's inferred. So we don't need the return statement. And it just makes things a lot more readable. Now, it might not be at first, but once you play around with it, once you get used to things, this is definitely what you're going to be seeing out in the wild, and it is a best practice because it does avoid unnecessary boilerplate. So that's how we got to there. So we have our data. Now, really though, what do we want to do with our data? Well, we want to take that URL, switch back to our actual, we'll get rid of that, switch back to our actual project. And when a user types in some text, we want to take that URL given back from the first GIF image, and we want to go ahead and swap that bad boy out for this one and put in the new one. Subsequently, as your challenge, you're going to use that same URL and update this paragraph tag. So first, let's work on the image together. Well, we're working on the image. Very first thing we need to do is obviously grab that image tag. So we can do that right up here, just like how we did. And I'm going to say const GIF, and I'm going to do container. You'll see why in a second. and that's going to equal document.querySelector. And I'm going to do gif-container. Now, where am I getting this from? If I look back over to our index.html file, I have our GIF form, GIF input, and then also our GIF container right there. So now I want to go ahead and grab the image from right here. And I'm going to set that source attribute over to the new URL. So the way I'm going to do that here is I'm going to say have that data. And now I'm going to go ahead and use those curly braces. And I'm going to do, don't get ahead of myself here. Let's grab that image real quick. Const GIF image equals, in the context of the GIF container, I'm going to do dot query selector. Now each container, the idea is that there's only going to be an image tag and a paragraph tag. So just like how I was having qualifiers that were by ID, I can also do it just by the actual element type itself, which is an image. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, I have that image, and I want your source to be equal to that data URL. Now, what is that data URL? Well, let's log that out one more time, just so we can kind of get a sense of what that whole output looks like. So if I say tomato, and I get our data, well, here's the data object, and then we do dot data, and keep in mind that this is an array. So dot data, we want the first index, crack that open because it's an object. We want the images, which is an object, and then we're going to do dot original for the URL. So I'm going to go through that here. I'm going to say, just so we don't have to do that whole data.data, I'm going to say data equals data.data, just like that. So from here I can do, so I reassign data to essentially strip away all of the meta and the pagination info. So data equals data, which is everything, dot data. And in case that's not clear, if I log out data, and if I type in something like hi, note that I don't get that other information anymore. I just get the data that we're concerned with. So hopefully that makes sense. So then we have that. So we can do data dot, or data actually index 0 dot images dot original dot URL. And let's test that out. Console.log data index 0 dot images dot original dot URL. Now hopefully this goes ahead and gives us our actual GIF image link. So let's do something like toast. I'm actually pretty hungry, hence all of the food entries. But that's not the toast I was looking for. What is that? Come on. Oh well, that'll do. So we have that, and that's awesome, right? So all we have to do here, because we have the user's input, instead of logging that out, we can just say keep that, and we can say GIF image equals, or what, GIF image dot source equals that URL. And once we do that, check out what happens. I'm going to refresh. In the moment of truth, I'm going to do Goku. Dun dun dun. We have our Super Saiyan God mode. And if I do some lag, what does Pokemon give us? Pichu, smack her little booty. And then if I do something like Naruto, obviously I'm in a Naturo. You get Kakashi hitting Thor. Pretty good stuff. Okay, cool. So I'm actually going to stop right there. And I'll leave everything else up to you. So this is coming from my GitHub. And from here you can look at some other challenges. So some things that you can do, you can still need to update that paragraph tag. Right now we're getting all of the data coming back. Really we just want 5. That way it still gives us some wiggle room in the future. And then right now we have all of our logic in this single then. You can always go ahead and take this out and put it in its own function. One that's maybe called search Giphy for this. And then you can do a .then on that and say, then go ahead and update fields. So that's something that we cover in my class. I will leave you with 2 little tidbits. After we go ahead and search, we can do gif input .value equals an empty string. So that'll reset the input field back to whatever it should be. And then next up, right when we get to our loading screen, we can say gif input .focus. And what is that going to do? Well, causes the element to receive the focus and executes the code specified on the onFocus event. A really fancy way of saying, hey, when we load this page, go ahead and start us off on the input already. We don't have to click on it, it's already ready to go for us. Just to test that out and let us know what's going on, I refresh and it defaults to being in this input field. I didn't have to click on it. Do that again, I'm already in it. And if I search, you could do something like happy. Notice that the text went ahead and disappeared. Now something interesting here. Right now we're just assuming that everything goes right. But what if I type in something like mumbo jumbo, and we try to get the images off of mumbo jumbo? Well, this one worked. We'll do something like that. Aha! Right over here we say cannot read property images of undefined, meaning we didn't get any images, but we still tried to access stuff off of that, namely the images and then the .original. .original didn't exist, and so it threw an error. So how do you prevent that? I'm going to leave that up to you as a super duper bonus challenge. If you guys aren't familiar with promises, then go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Feel free to leave me a comment. Let me know any optimizations that you would do. Again, this is not using any frameworks. Very, very bare bones, yet it does show the power of what all you can do in all of 19 lines of code, not even. Perfect. But I appreciate you guys taking the time, and I will catch you later.